Hello, my name is Hannah, and the ism I decided to research is culturalism. Specifically, why do teachers have lower expectations for ELL students? ELL meaning English language learners, so students who are new to learning English. Why do teachers have lower expectations for those students than other students in their class? So, a little bit about me and why I chose this question. I am a special education teacher. Currently, I teach learning support in central Pennsylvania. So, learning support is referred to in some other states as a resource model. So, I push in to third, fourth, and fifth grade classes, and I also pull small groups of students. And most recently, I've noticed that some ELL students who are not on my caseload but whom I interact with regularly receive very similar adaptations and modifications as I make for my students who have learning disabilities, despite these ELL students not having learning disabilities themselves. They just have a language barrier or they're learning English still. They don't actually have a learning disability. Um, and so while I'm accommodating and adapting and modifying for students who do have learning disabilities, I've noticed that some students who don't have learning disabilities are receiving similar accommodations or being held to a lower standard than other students in their class. So this led me genuinely to ask the question, why do teachers have these lower expectations of ELL students? So it wasn't only from my own personal experience. When I started to research, I found that indeed some teachers do hold lower expectations for the English language learning students in their classes. So the research I found behind this um, states that in some classrooms, according to Moore, English language learning students are not expected to participate as much or at all in classroom discussions. Now, especially in the elementary level, much of our education system is structured through class discussion and class participation. As students get older, I realize that that's not always the model. We move more to lecture and note taking, but especially in the primary and intermediate elementary level, participation in class discussion are usually a big part of class and a big part of learning. And so, not all classrooms and not all classroom teachers require or expect ELL students to participate in this part of class. Um, Diaz, another researcher, and his colleagues found that many teachers believe that ELL students need to be proficient in English before they can learn the content. So they believe that they need to have English mastered and they can be fluent in it before they can start learning content area material. So that would then lead to teachers not expecting students to learn or be proficient in grade level material if they are not yet fluent or proficient in English, which would be a little bit of a discrepancy in an expectation of a student who's not an L who would be expected to learn the grade level curriculum. And so due to this belief, the belief that ELL students cannot learn content until they learn English, students in many schools are tracked into classes like ESL or ELL or ELD classes that focus solely on English vocabulary and drill and reading and writing and speaking instead of focusing on the grade level content. So that researcher was Lee who found that to be the case. So we have many students who are not participating um, for many different reasons, one of which being that teachers don't think they can until they are proficient in English. So there's a couple of reasons that I found that teachers hold these expectations of their ELL students. Some hold these expectations because they don't want to embarrass their students who may not yet be fluent or feel comfortable speaking in English. And while that is very much appreciated, I'm sure, as teachers, we don't want to embarrass students and we want students to have positive experiences with education. So we don't expect them to speak out in class if they are not yet fluent or comfortable with the language that everybody else is speaking. Diaz, again, and his colleagues note that another reason teachers may hold lower expectations for ELL students is because they may not have the training or experience with students who are learning English and simply may not understand that students can learn the English language and content simultaneously. Now, of course, they will still require accommodations, but we don't have to put a pause on the content learning to help them learn English. They can learn those things simultaneously, and some teachers just may not have the training or experience that is required to know that piece of information. And then Lee and Buxton also noted that some teachers can view language as too tall of a barrier, and they feel that language acquisition is a barrier for students learning other content. And so that's a barrier for them, and they again feel that they need to learn English before they can then broach that barrier. So, all that being said, is some teachers do hold lower expectations for ELL students, and there's a number of reasons why, but as teachers, there are steps we can take to push back against this and make sure we're holding all of our students to appropriate, rigorous, and high standards in our classroom. So, one researcher suggests simplifying our language without dumbing it down. So, dumbing it down sounds a little harsh, but those are actually the words that the researcher used. We don't want to be condescending to students or make students question their intelligence or their ability. And so we want to make sure our language is simplified, but not condescending or on a level far too low for them developmentally. So keeping it simple with clear and concise directions, one step at a time. Graphic organizers and visuals can help ELL students to keep things simple and organized without being taught at a level that is beneath them. So keeping things simple, but being sure that it's developmentally and grade level appropriate as well, and age appropriate. Another thing we can do as teachers to make sure our expectations are appropriate, another researcher suggests using hands-on and inquiry-based activities, particularly in science class, to aid in students' understanding. So this is a study that was done about science classes. And science is often a content area that is high in the use of academic language, but it's also a content area where we as teachers can provide hands-on learning experiences and inquiry-based activities to our students. Sometimes it comes more naturally to us as teachers to do this with science and math rather than ELA or history. And so especially in those content areas, providing hands-on and inquiry-based learning to students when we can aids in their understanding of concepts, because it's less language-based and it's more, I can figure out how to do this. I can actually do these practical things. And so that might help students build their confidence as well as their understanding. So in math and science particularly, we can use those hands-on and inquiry-based activities to really help our ELL students. Another researcher and his colleagues note that ELL students perceived their quote-unquote good teachers to be encouraging, patient, kind, and teachers who take the time to listen to their students, who map out things step by step for them. This was a study done of ELL students reflecting on, or people who were ELL students reflecting on their experience in school. And so they gave characteristics of what to them was a bad teacher and a good teacher. And so they suggest to be a good teacher, these are the things that you can do. Encourage students, be patient with them as they are still learning an incredible amount of this language that we all speak. Being patient is key. Taking the time to actually listen to our students, map things out, give them one step at a time if we need to. And as a personal note, As a special ed teacher, this is something every kid can benefit from, being encouraging, patient, kind, listening to them. This won't only benefit your ELL students, in my opinion, but all of your students. So this is something we can all strive to do. And lastly, another practical step that was shared in the What Works Clearinghouse, they suggest employing the use of pictures and short videos, especially at the start of lessons, to ensure all students have a shared backgrounds or background knowledge. And so students who don't speak English at home or aren't native English speakers may have come from a different cultural background. And so playing a short video or using some pictures at the beginning of a lesson helps students get that background knowledge and make sure to level the playing field so we can expect the same thing of all students throughout the lesson. Also, to note, by no means did I find in any of my research that we should not accommodate and modify for our students who need that, whether they have special education needs or language needs. However, we can still hold these students to high educational standards to ensure that they don't lose grade level material and have those gaps in their education while they're also learning English. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen and watch. I hope you learned something about culturalism and why teachers hold lower expectations for ELL students, and some things we can all do as teachers to help combat that. Thanks again.